We should talk a little bit about some of the different ethnomethodological methods that social science researchers use to try and figure out what's going on out there in the world. There are 4 or 5 basic methods. Now, it's important for us to understand that when we're talking about the methods of research for a sociologist, we oftentimes think about things like that as kind of set in stone. Well, let's see, there's interviews, and there's questionnaires, and there's observation studies, but we don't really think about methodological fields as evolving, and surely they do. As we become more proficient at describing social reality, we have to figure out new methods with which to do so. And so I want to talk a little bit about the major ethnomethodological methods today, but I also want you to bear in mind that there are likely new methods that are being explored as I speak to you. This is not a closed category. Now remember, we're talking about the broader category of phenomenology here. Ethnomethodology is the methods by which people who are using phenomenological theories do their research. What is it that we do to reach out to those people in a social setting and gather data from them? So open-ended and in-depth interviews is one that's pretty easy to understand, and we use this when we use many different types of theories. Functionalists use this method, conflict theorists use this method, and so on. It can, however, when you're using open-ended questions or in-depth interviews, be challenging to analyze this kind of information. And let me give you an example of why that is. So this is just a chart that gives you an idea of how we might take information from an interview, gather it together, and make some sense out of it. We would start at the bottom level here with our basic themes, and here we have to review all of the materials in our interviews and tease out what we feel to be the important information in each of those interviews. And once we have that, we might gather that into some what we call organizing themes. In other words, I may find in 3 or 4 interviews that there's a common thread there, that the people I've interviewed are talking about the same kind or type of concern. I can put that into an organizing theme. Once I do this and get those organizing themes set, I want to look for a global theme, and this will help me to develop, potentially, new theories. Now let me show you what this looks like from a research project that I actually did, and you'll see why it can get quite complex. Alright, so this is a research project that I did where I interviewed a couple of dozen child abuse investigators in Brevard County, Florida. And these interviews were well over several hours worth of tapes. And so once I had all of the interviews completed, I transcribed all of the interviews and read through them to look for themes. And if you look at the bottom here, I found a couple that didn't seem to be related too much to each other. But as I moved up, what I found was that all of these organizing themes and basic themes that I was able to put together throughout all of these interviews led me to see that the overarching theme was communication problems between the public and private work sphere. Now, I don't know that a phenomenologist would actually go to these lengths to analyze the information that they find, for example, in a series of interviews. And here I used symbolic interaction and feminist theories as the main foundations for my research project, but you can see how difficult and challenging it can be when you've got hours and hours and hours worth of materials to look through to try and tease out some of those similar themes in your data. Alright, so that's open-ended or in-depth interviews. Again, a little bit difficult to analyze and very, very time-intensive. We also, using phenomenology as our theoretical foundation, can use the ethnomethodological method of participant observation. And again, this isn't a method that only phenomenologists use. Many of our theories would use participant observation as a method. Now, it can be done 2 ways. It can be done overtly. In other words, I go to a group who I want to research, I tell them who I am, what I want to do, and I observe them. And I hope that I haven't changed their behavior by telling them who I am and what I'm doing there. I could also decide to mount a covert participant observation project in which the people I'm observing don't know that I'm a researcher. And I'll give you a quick example of this. In my personal life, I actually do ballroom dancing. I've been doing that for a couple of years, and when I first started doing it, going to the studio and learning about what ballroom dancing was, I thought, well, how interesting would a research project be here? Maybe I'll just be like a fly on the wall, and as I'm taking my own lessons, I'll just observe people and write about them. Well, of course, I never really did that, but it seemed like it would be an interesting covert participant observation research project. A third method that we might use is videotaping, and this type of method is very helpful to researchers who might be looking for non-verbal cues or communications between groups of people. And so videotape can be extremely helpful. You probably can think about this in terms of those cop shows that you see on TV where they've got the person in the room and they're interviewing them and they're trying to look at all of their body language and all of the different cues that they're giving off aside from what they're actually verbally saying. So videotaping for a sociologist can be a fascinating method. Again, it is time intensive and it can be somewhat challenging to analyze the information, but it's a very interesting type of research to do. Now, the documentary method is one that is specific, for now, to phenomenology. And so here, the documentary method is used to help uncover underlying or hidden meanings in the research. And so what happens here is the researcher gets a sense of how the research participants, the subjects of the research, interpret and reinterpret their reality to try and get that basis of meaning in it. And so oftentimes the documentary method is used in conjunction with other methods. I do interviews with people, or I do a participant observation research project, and when I'm done with that and I'm looking through all of the information that I'm gathering, or during the course of gathering all of that information, I start to see some underlying meanings coming through. Now, the last kind of ethnomethodological method I want to talk about is breaching experiments. These are the ones that can get you into all kinds of trouble. I used to, years ago, allow my students to go out and do breaching experiments in public. And sometimes we would come up with some very humorous results. But I started to realize very quickly that this was a research method where people could get hurt. And in the past, while I've been very lucky not to have any students get hurt or harmed in any way, I can say that I have had colleagues who have had students who have been hurt. And the most recent of these that I can tell you is a colleague who allowed a male student to go to the beach wearing a bikini. And this was a pretty big, brawny kind of guy, and he had a beard, and he showed up at a very popular beach wearing a string bikini. And this caused an uproar, and a few people approached him, and as it turns out, he was shoved down to the ground and knocked around a little bit. People didn't like it. Breaching experiments can have humorous results, and they can also have dangerous results because they disrupt our sense of normalcy. They disrupt our normal, ordinary activities. And what happens is you have to stand back and you have to figure out how to process that information. And that can be very threatening to people on a personal level. I have had students do some funny experiments. I've had some female students go into the mall, into the food court, and very loudly burp, while they were sitting close to people. And some of the results that they have recorded have been extremely funny. I have had male students who have worn fingernail polish, And I actually had a male student in the past who wore a skirt to school. All right, I should say kilt. It wasn't actually a skirt, but he did get a lot of comments from other students about what he was doing and why he was doing it. So while I don't allow my students to do these types of experiments anymore, they can provide a very fascinating look for a phenomenologist into that idea that we have of how we make sense of and how we give meaning to social reality. All right, I hope this helps you understand the ethnomethodological methods that are used. And remember, a very flexible category. We come up with new methods and new research designs all of the time. Take care. We'll talk again soon.